started. Excited today for this Health and Wellness Service Team Committee of the Whole workshop on the holistic approach to ending youth displacement. Excited to hear more about how our teams are working together to keep children out of the incarceration system. So I'm going to turn it over to Kathy Hadeen, our Deputy County Manager for the Ramsey County Health and Wellness Service Team.
Thank you, Chair Bretham, and hello, commissioners and everyone who's on this morning. We're happy to be here for our first Health and Wellness Committee of the Whole of 2021. Director John Clavens, along with Deputy Director Monica Long and Assistant Deputy Director Kim Stubblefield are here from Community Corrections. And Jamie, if you want to start sharing the PowerPoint, that would be fantastic. And move along to the slide that says who's here. We also have Director Ann Berry and Division Director Kim Clemenson here from Social Services. And thank you to Judge Ireland, who is also joining us today. We are looking forward to providing information about progress around our work to end the displacement of our youth from our systems. And we'll highlight data, talk about challenges and opportunities, along with solutions to moving forward together. And with that, I will hand it over to Director Clavens. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for this opportunity today. And we are looking forward to the conversation regarding juvenile youth displacement and the work that's gone on both in corrections and social services, and the work that we are working on toward the future as well. Just a big thank you again to the commissioners, to the tri-chairs of JDAI, the Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative, for the ongoing support over the years that we've been doing this work. I also want to thank our Community Corrections Evaluation Team, Leah Bauer, Ed Hoke, who have done a tremendous job of tracking data for us for many years, frankly, really trying to keep track of where our youth are and the situations that we see them in, and as we try to reduce the amount of out-of-home correctional displacement. Also, thanks to our justice system partners, and thank you to Judge Ireland for being here. Members of the bench that have been supportive in this work are critical, and we really appreciate that tremendously. And frankly, without Yvonne Salazar, Jamie Levine, Jen Nance, we probably wouldn't be here at all because of the technical support that our admin staff offer us. So thank you to them as well. We're all in this work together. It takes a community and an entire justice system to help with the work that we're talking about this morning. The objectives for today on the slide 3, if the slides are up here, is to really review again community corrections youth displacements and the work that we've done with the Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative, and then the deep end data as we moved into that work in 2015. Also, I think significantly important this morning will be a discussion on community programming alternatives, and both Kim Stubblefield and Kim Clemenson will highlight some of the work going on for alternatives for our youth and families, and also a review of crossover collaboration, those youth that move between the systems of corrections and social services and how that occurs, and the additional analysis we need to do on some of the data related to those cases as well. Social services also has provided some data on displacements through their department as well. And then, of course, challenges and opportunities. We have a lot of opportunities to discuss toward the end of the presentation, and look forward to hearing everyone's thoughts on those opportunities. Slide 4 talks about the purpose of displacement. And again, just a high-level summary. Really, for community corrections, it's in response to youth who commit serious person-related offenses. Also for treatment or rehabilitation of youthful clients. And I would also add families as well, that, you know, the support that we do with programming for youth, whether it's in the community or a displacement, really also needs to address some family support as well. And then maintaining community safety as we address issues that come up. And then for social services, of course, child safety, mental health treatment, and additional supports that that both Ann and Kim will highlight later on in the presentation. Just to look at some data, and commissioners, I know you're familiar with the JDAI data that we presented, as well as this data usually is presented to our JDAI tri-chairs and stakeholders meetings throughout the year. But just a quick snapshot to go over some of the data that we've been tracking for a number of years. And what you see here on this very first slide is the decrease in youth served in juvenile probation. So this isn't displacement, this is actually probation. the number of youth that we have under supervision, which, as you see, has steadily declined since 2015. Down to where last year we had around 526 youth that were served in the juvenile probation system. Going back, if you went back even 5 years to 2010, you would see well over 1,000 youth on probation back in the earlier days as well. The next slide talks about the percentage of youth. So these are youth on probation and the percentage of youth that actually are placed. So in many ways, we look at this as kind of the highest risk, highest need clients that we have in juvenile probation. And again, those percentages have steadily come down. In 2014, around 20% of our youth that we served were subject to out-of-home displacement, where as of last year, we were at around 11% of youth. And again, overall numbers are down as well as the overall placement numbers. We certainly would like to see this number go lower and get under 10% or closer to 5%. And we'll talk more about that in the presentation. Also understanding that some of the youth are being served by social services as well through different types of programs and supports offered through that agency. The next slide, community corrections out-of-home displacements. So again, these are numbers of youth that we've seen in displacement from 2014 through 2020. The red bar indicates unduplicated youth placed, so the actual number of youth themselves, and the gray bar is placement admissions. The reason you see the difference, of course, is that some youth end up with multiple placements. They may be in and out of placement multiple times throughout the year, and so you have a higher number of admissions overall versus the unduplicated placement numbers. I don't know if Monica is in. She was going to step into the next slide here. Monica, are you on or not? I can't see the list of folks. Otherwise, I'll cover these slides. Okay, not hearing that she's on the line. So these slides talk about the racial breakdown of the clients that we serve, again, in the juvenile corrections system and displacement. So overall, what you see at the top there is a 76% decrease in correctional displacement. Yep.
Can I just say, it looks like Monica Long is in the attendees list. I'm just wondering, Jamie, are you able to move her to a panelist list? It also looks like Commissioner McGuire might be stuck in that attendee list as well.
They've all been pushed over to panelists. So perhaps it's in limbo.
Oh, I see Monica now on the list.
And Commissioner McGuire as well. She should also be there.
Yeah, I see them both, but I don't hear either of them jumping in. So I'll let you continue, John. Oh, there she is.
Monica.
Thank you.
So Monica Long, Deputy Director of Community Corrections. Monica, we are at slide 8. So if you're settled and ready, please feel free to jump in, and we'll go from there.
I am sorry about that. Technology didn't like me today. So I don't know where you were at. I apologize, John. I was trying to get in there. There has been a 76% decrease in correctional displacement admissions for youth of color from 2014 to 2020. For Black youth, the number of admissions have decreased by 83%, which is significant. Next slide, please. Despite the reductions in the displacements, however, we still see disparities in youth of color. Black youth comprise of 18% of the Ramsey County population, and that's ages 10 to 19, but accounted for 52% of youth displaced in 2020. White youth make up 53% of Ramsey County population. However, 14% of those youth were displaced in 2020. Something interesting in this slide is if you flip the white non-Hispanic youth and the Black youth, it almost mirrors the disparity to the percentage point. Next slide, please. Displacement for our youth are reserved predominantly for youth who are assigned to probation for felony or violent offenses. Also, youth assessed at high risk to reoffend and who have multiple and significant needs that cannot be addressed in the community and need a different level of care to address the needs. You can see it on youth placed by offense type. 98 were felony or violent offenses with 2% non-felony, non-violent. Youth placed by risk level, mere 78% at very high risk, medium risk 20%, and 2% low risk.
So where were our youth displaced in 2020? This slide is summarizing where youth were placed in 2020 and the count of admissions, along with the average length of stay for each of those placements. And so in 2020, we had 20 youth at the Moorhead program, followed by 15 youth at various inpatient CD programs, and then followed by Red Wing. And then of course, you can see that we continue to use our Twin City group homes. And then we had a few kids at the East Regional Juvenile Detention Center, which is in Lino Lakes. And so it looks like as far as average length of stay for our kids in 2020, Red Wing's average length of stay is longer. Red Wing tends to be a longer program, just under a year. And in my time knowing the Red Wing programming and what they offer, generally young people are ordered to 9 to 12 months at Red Wing.
Thank you. Commissioner Manis Castillo has a question. There doesn't appear to be a raise hand option anymore. So folks can certainly send me a message if they have a question, but I'd like to call on Commissioner Manis Castillo, who has a question about convictions.
Yeah, thank you. Before we go further, I just wanted to clarify for my own understanding is, as we're talking about youth that get placed into this system, if they're tried as adults, do they get put into a different system, or are we considering them based on age?
Right, so these placements reflect kids that are served by the juvenile system. So it doesn't include kids who are certified as adults. It may include kids though, where there was a motion to certify and they remain in the juvenile system, either designated as EJJ or just in what we call the straight juvenile system with no EJJ designation. So once youth are certified to adult, then they move on to the adult system, and that's not reflected in these counts.
And would we track that? My fear is that because we're doing this great work in juvenile, that maybe more kids are certified as adults. And I don't want us to have a system of like, we're just moving people around, but that we're really taking care of our young people. Are we tracking how many get certified as adults and what that trend is?
We do have some data on certifications that I can share back to this group. So yes, we do track that. We track the number of motions to certify that happen, and also how many youth are actually certified in a given year.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Manis-Castillo. It looks like we do have a raise hand button now, or at least I do, but then I see Commissioner Carter's got her hand raised.
Thank you. I'm not sure if you saw me on the screen or on the raised hand function. I did use it. And so I am thankful to see the direction, for the most part, of the work that is happening here, and to see that we are continuing to reduce our use, albeit continuing also to see the disparities in these areas of displacement. I am wondering whether we're talking about detention or whether we're talking about displacement in these kinds of facilities. What we know about reoffending and recidivism, and I'll also attach to this how we are working to address the goals of displacement in particular. I've looked through the slides, and I know the different sets of work are going to be coming up, but I'm wondering about those two measurements, what we're doing to measure reoffending, and also how we're looking at goals specifically of displacement. We know that that is an area we've talked about in the past, and the unevenness of having goals that may not reflect the same kinds of pursuits if kids or young people are at home or if they're in displacement. So forgive me for that multiple question, but could you just briefly address what we are doing or what we are looking to do?
So Commissioner, thank you for that question. One of the things that we have worked really hard on is having a case plan for each of our youth who are in placement, so that we have some identified goals that they are working toward when they're in placement, and so that we have a measure for how they are progressing during that time that they are in placement. I think another thing that we have worked, and I'll talk a little bit about that later on in the presentation, about our case plan model that centers young people and families. And then I think the other thing that we are always working on in juvenile probation is partnering with our community-based agencies and trying our best whenever possible to keep young people in the community. And so sometimes we are, and kids and families are successful at that. And sometimes they have not been successful at programming in the community. And I think that reflects some of the numbers you're seeing on this slide. I think this is always a challenging area. One of the things that we have is a staffing committee that reviews all cases before a kid is displaced from their home. That staffing committee consists of the probation officer and supervisors, a licensed mental health professional, our programming staff who can say, here's what's available in the community. We think that needs can be met in the community, and here are some programs that we could offer this family. And so before any youth is displaced from the home, cases are staffed with that out-of-home placement staffing committee. We think that's an important piece in the process. And the other thing I want to say about that committee is we invite families to be part of that staffing. And so even in this virtual world that we find ourselves in, we have families joining us to tell us what their concerns are, what they feel that the needs are for the child and the family, and being clear about what they want and what they don't want. And so those are a few things. And again, as we go into the presentation, I can talk a little bit more about the work that we've done with case planning. And I don't know if there's more that my team here wants to share, John and Monica.
This is John. Thank you, Kim. No, I think sounds like you've covered a lot of the details. I think to Commissioner Carter's question, certainly we want to make sure we always have a solid case plan, a treatment plan in place for the youth, as Kim mentioned, whether they're in the community, and certainly if they're in a program someplace, we do look very closely at these plans to make sure that there's family involved, the needs are being addressed, whether it's mental health or chemical health issues, and ultimately trying to get the youth to work through the program to get back into the community as soon as possible and as safely as possible, and incorporating again family support as they re-enter and return into the community. So thank you again for the question.
I wonder if I could just extend the question a bit to the recidivism piece. How are we measuring reoffending at this point?
I know one of the ways that we measure is after a youth has been in placement, we look at that year post-placement to see if there has been a reduction in offending behavior in the community. So I know that is one of the ways we measure recidivism, but also, to be honest with you, we like to hear from families. Like, we like to hear from families about what changes they've seen, and also from our young people. That's a little trickier, but I do know that that measurement that I gave you about 1 year post-placement is something that we track.
Would love to hear in the future any trending in that regard. Thank you.
Certainly.
Thank you, Commissioner Carter. Commissioner McGuire has her hand raised.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate that. And I appreciate my little hand raising function that appeared. Thanks for all of this information so far. If you could just expand a little bit about what contributes to the multiple home displacements or multiple site displacements. Is that because we're just trying to get it right with these students or with these residents, with these youth? Or is it because we, they do the work in one program, then they go to another program, or one program doesn't work out, or is it a combination? Just I'm guessing, and I just want to know if you could comment a little bit more on. I'm thinking about slide number 7, where there was that increase in displacements versus the number of youth. Yeah.
Yeah, and what I would say to that is that sometimes there are more admissions to placement than youth, because youth could be in out-of-home placement for one offense and come back later that year for a different offense. That's possible. That's a reason that you could be seeing more placements than youth. There are youth who are placed multiple times. And so that's one of the scenarios that could happen. We could have a youth that's on probation for a certain offense, and then there could later be a motion to certify on a separate offense that occurs later. And so what I would say, one of the things that contributes to this is multiple offenses that happen at different times.
Okay. And I appreciate that, because I was a little nervous, because I thought, oh, I would appreciate that we're getting it right, but that we're not just moving them too much from one place to another, except for in the case you just described. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you, and thanks to our technical staff who got us the hand raise. Make sure when your questions are answered, you put your hands down, so I know if there's a question, and I think we can keep going.
All right. So this last slide that we just reviewed were placements for 2020. And then this is where youth are displaced as of January 14th of this year. And so we know that these numbers can shift quickly. And so we have 21 youth displaced as of January 14th, or at least on that date. And we know that 8 of those youth were at Red Wing, followed by another 7 at Moorhead. The group of young people that are categorized as other is a small group of young people. So we don't break out. We have one youth here, one youth there as a way to protect our young people's identity and information. But what we can tell you is that that number 6 are youth who are at the various programs that you see noted there, like Southwest Youth Services, a couple of our inpatient CD treatment programs, and Mille Lacs Academy. And so again, a total of 21 youth. And if you look to the right, it gives you the average age for those youth. And then just to let you know, as of today, again, as I said, those numbers can change quickly. So I did look at our dashboard today, and today we have 22 youth in placement. I want to turn it over to Judge Ireland to talk a little bit about adjudication, the purpose of adjudication, and some of the considerations for youth who are adjudicated and those youth who are not adjudicated. And then I will speak a little bit more about displacements then and now.
Yeah, thank you. I'll try and keep this brief because I know we've got limited amount of time and I'm the least important person talking on this panel. So adjudication is just a fancy term that the lawyers and the judges use, but it actually has some pretty serious consequences for youth, collateral consequences for youth. So in the adult system, you're convicted and you're adjudicated guilty. In the juvenile system, oftentimes a juvenile or a child is either found guilty, oftentimes plead guilty to a crime, and then they are either we withhold adjudication of delinquency or we adjudicate them delinquent. And it's a label. And it goes back to the idea, which is a correct one, that when you're 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 years old, your brain isn't fully developed. And so you don't treat juveniles in the same way as an adult in terms of the mens rea or the intent that they have when they commit a crime. The reality is that obviously when you adjudicate someone delinquent, that means that probation can go on for an extended period of time up until they're 18, maybe even 19 years old. When you're not adjudicated, when you withhold adjudication of delinquency, probation has 180 days to work with a child. And then under a fairly recent statute, that 180 days can be extended. The collateral consequences, or the real life, the immediate consequences, is that a lot of the placements can only occur as part of their criteria to be placed there is that they are adjudicated delinquent. If you withhold delinquency, then that's a signal that services can be provided in the community. The long-term consequences, can run the range in terms of education, housing, jobs, and depending on the age of the juvenile, the child, and the type of offense, it could also count in their criminal history score if they committed offenses as an adult. Those are, and usually when someone is adjudicated delinquent, oftentimes they have multiple significant offenses that they've committed that indicate that whatever is going on is not likely to be adequately addressed within the 180 days, or there's a significant public safety concern where the county attorney is seeking adjudication because, let's say, the juvenile is 17 and a half years old and they commit a serious crime offense, a serious gun offense, let's say. And the prosecutor wants to ensure that if they keep it in the juvenile system, but if they do continue that behavior as an adult, that is reflected in their criminal history score. So that's what adjudication is. And I think that the goal, I think, of our system is to not adjudicate juveniles. That's our goal. If we catch kids when they're smaller offenses and we're providing them services, hopefully they don't get to the point where it triggers another offense that they are adjudicated.
Thank you, Judge.
Thank you. I see Commissioner Carter has her hand raised. Did you have a question? Nope. Okay, Commissioner McGuire.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Judge. And I would I would say you're very important on this panel. You're equally as important on this panel. We know everyone is. Thank you for that great reminder and description of adjudication. So if a juvenile if they need treatment in the community, they can be placed there without being adjudicated. But what if they would need more intense services? Then do you have to adjudicate them? I'm just sort of struggling with, I love that the goal is to not adjudicate because we don't like that hanging over them, but does that label get them more intense services? And so are we forced then to adjudicate? I know I just want a little more clarification. I think you've been talking about that this whole time, but if you could just help me a little bit more.
Yeah, I would say a good example is when a juvenile is charged with criminal sexual conduct. It's a serious offense, and the treatment for criminal sexual conduct, it goes on because it's a complex situation. There's family dynamics, there's situational dynamics, there's criminal thinking going on, and so it puts, I think, the system in a very difficult situation because you know that the child needs long-term treatment for public safety and for themselves. And certainly the victims of the offenses also want accountability. On the flip side, you know that the collateral consequences for criminal sexual conduct, which is the registration as a sex offender, that is going to significantly impact someone's ability to turn 18, become an adult, and become a functioning part of society. And so I think the county attorney and the probation has done a really good job in terms of trying to think a little bit more creatively on those types of offenses, and trying to front load some of those treatments before the decision about whether or not to adjudicate. So you actually provide some of the services first, and then the case follows in terms of, and it gives an incentive for the juvenile to really cooperate with the therapy and the programming. But that is absolutely the tension, is that there are certain services that the juvenile needs, but they can't access it if you withhold the adjudication. So.
Okay, thank you for that, and thank you for that example. And yeah, the tension. I can obviously see it. Thank you for that.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions or hands up, so we can move along.
All right, so I wanted to talk a little bit about the community-based services that we offer families in juvenile probation. And so we've had a contract for many years for family therapy. And pre-COVID, it was therapy that was done in the home and with the whole family, and it's called functional family therapy. That's been a pretty successful model in juvenile probation, and right now those services are virtual, but we continue to utilize those services for kids and families. The other thing that we're really working on building, and we've had a couple of our young people be involved in, is restorative justice programming, where kids are trying to restore some of the harm that they've done in the community. And that brings the client, our young people, and then also the victim together in the circle process to try to do some healing. And so the Dispute Resolution Center has done some of that work for a couple of our families in juvenile probation. And then we also have what's called Wraparound, which is an intensive community-based service for kids and families, where there's an assessment of the needs and then a plan that's developed through Change Inc. And then they continue to work intensively with the child and the family to help the child stabilize in the community. And some of the services that can come from that are things like individual or family therapy or skill building. It just depends on what the needs are for the child and the family. We also offer cognitive behavioral programming. One of the curriculums is called Decision Points, and it really helps kids to connect their thinking with their feelings and subsequently with their behavior, in hopes that they will begin to make better decisions. And so that is offered in a group format, and that is done by our staff here in corrections. And then cognitive behavior interventions can also be done on an individual basis, and we have begun to do that as well. Now, a lot of the programming services that I've just talked about are things that are now being offered virtually due to COVID. And so we've had to work really closely with kids and families to get devices so that kids can participate in programming. And then those devices can also serve as their connection to school, as their connection to their probation officer. And then the other thing that probation has really utilized are individualized service funds, where we understand that kids and family may have individualized needs around treatment or program or services or even basic needs. And we can use those funds to meet some of those needs. And the other thing that I just want to mention is work that's happening at the Juvenile Detention Center around creating a more therapeutic environment for our clients. We know that a lot of our clients in the juvenile system have multiple needs that include mental health diagnosis or substance use. And so our goal is to always be meeting all of those needs. And because the Juvenile Detention Center houses some of our juveniles, we want to work with them so that there's a more therapeutic environment. The Juvenile Detention Center has a couple of mental health professionals that assist kids who are in crisis. And so I didn't want to end without mentioning that. Earlier, I talked briefly about family engaged case planning and the work that we're doing to develop case plans with kids and families. The goal of probation is to shift away from surveillance and compliance alone and to really work on supporting kids and families in making long-term changes. And that takes time, and it also takes probation working differently. And so in 2018, we trained our staff in that model of case planning, and we continue that work today. I want to acknowledge that we are still working on that model, that this has been a real shift for us in how we work with kids and families. But this is good work. It's necessary work. We have to be working differently. We have to center families. The foundation of our work has to be engagement. And we have to be able to see the assets and the skills and the resources that kids and their families bring. And so that's, again, work that's continuing in probation. The last thing that I want to talk about is that because of the progress that we've made with the model of case planning that we are trying to do in juvenile probation, we were invited by the Annie E. Casey Foundation to be a part of a work group where they are now developing a national model for training. And so we will have in-house trainers who can continue to train our staff in family engaged case planning. And then we will be able to train new staff as they enter probation. That again is work that began in 2018. It continues today. It's very important work. It's the foundation of what we do. And so that is where I will leave it for now.
Thank you, Kim. I think that cuts straight to the idea of sustainability. How do we keep things going and we're not just responding in a moment, that Chair Carter raised in our meeting earlier today. All right, next.
Good morning, everyone. This is Kim Clemenson. We share the same goals as corrections regarding displacement and really working collaboratively to make sure each youth has an individual plan. Back in 2018, we jointly developed a youth crossover youth protocol, and more recently have expanded that to a formal unit, which we are calling the Youth Intervention Team. This team is a multidisciplinary unit, and it includes child protection workers, youth workers that mainly have worked with runaway youth on the run, a children's mental health worker, and a PO. So the PO isn't actually embedded in the unit, but works collaboratively with social services to staff cases and make sure that we're all working together. Some of the things we're also doing with corrections, which Kim mentioned many of them, but we're using the individual service funds as well as multidisciplinary team staffings, which we have on a regular basis. We get together with our departments as well as community members, law enforcement, other people who are involved in a youth's life and talk about a plan. So that's a really good use of our multidisciplinary team and has been really successful in, as Kim said, helping with case plans and other things that we're doing for youth and family. Another thing, which Kim already mentioned, is the placement committee. So we all work jointly on that before a displacement occurs. And I'm just trying to look to see if there's anything we haven't mentioned here.
The audits of facilities.
Right. Yes, thank you, Ann. So we, prior to COVID, we were reviewing facilities across the country regularly. So we would make sure that we had a person physically go to all the different residential placements that we use and actually do an audit, meet with staff, meet with children, youth. And we have been, that went on hold for COVID, but we've been trying to regroup and get that started again. So we've been doing a little virtual work, but we'll get going on that very soon to do in-person audits again, because those are very important. We also do that anytime there's a concerning licensing, a licensing problem that we hear of, we send a staff out to talk with everyone at the facility.
I see Commissioner Mattis Castillo has her hand raised.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. My question is how is it decided where a youth is placed? So if they're going to Red Wing or if they're going out of state, and what factors are taken into account? I'm thinking of like the social supports, the further away we move them from family, in some cases might be positive, but in most cases it would be negative, I would presume. And so just how is that decided?
In the area of social services, that's decided in a multidisciplinary team. So, you know, if it's a crossover youth, then definitely we would be working with juvenile corrections, but we're looking to meet a child's individual needs. So it depends on what that is and who can meet that need. We always try to place children close to home. Just recently in the last year, we have been able to contract with some group homes that are really close to home in hopes of bridging that gap, but still working on that. And sometimes, unfortunately, we have to send children to Texas or Florida or other places for their mainly psychiatric needs on the social service side.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands, so we can keep moving.
So I think we've covered most of this. We are really moving forward, focusing on specialized caseloads so that, again, we are meeting the needs of all the youth and able to collaborate with other departments and divisions within social services. It's working really well. We're hoping to continue to add specialized caseloads and merge different units to you know, meet these needs. It's a good model for us in social services. I think we've gone over that slide, so.
All right, I'll take over from here. Thank you, Kim, and everyone has gone before me. When I want to do a couple of things here. One is when we take a look at the data that you saw in corrections, one of the questions I think people always ask is, so where did those children who are no longer in the system, or at least in the juvenile justice system, where are they? Well, some of them have moved into the social services system, and we think that's a good thing. And I'm going to talk about a specific case so you can see some of the things that both was contemplated by the court and county attorney's office and social services and corrections, which is how we've now moved to talking about children who are displaced, but they cross over between our system. They have committed crimes. And if you think back to the purpose of placement statement, where John talked about, you know, we're not talking necessarily about property crimes, we're talking about person crimes, right? But many, so again, the other part of the story is that in 2017, children that were in the correctional system, about 62 of them then crossed over and were placed in the social services system. So they were receiving a different kind of therapeutic support, maybe mental health support, think placements that we could do in social services and then were paid for and funded out of the Department of Human Services using 4E and other resources. So we just have data here for 2017 and 2018, but I think it's always been a really legitimate question. So where are these children? We had children who still had needs, right, in our system. And so we began serving them together, in some cases between corrections and social services, and in some cases just by social services. So you can see these 2 years of data that we pulled out of the social services information system. We'll talk about challenges later, but our systems don't necessarily communicate well with one another. So even inside the county, much less at the state level. So much of this is manual work for us to pull this out. So we could do it for 19 and 20, but I just think the important point is children still and their families still have needs, and we find a way to meet those needs. Next slide, please. All right, so what I wanted to do was talk about some of the displacement locations. You heard some of those for corrections as well, community corrections as well, and we do share some facilities. So you'll also see on our list is Jelani and Jordan House, some of them that we've built up in St. Paul and Ramsey County as well to serve families closer to home. But you can also see some of the shelters that we have available. Ada Young is a shelter. Arlington House is a shelter. 180 Degrees is for girls only. I think that is licensed as a group home actually. But this is just a mix of the kind of services that we have available and then the costs that are provided. There is a real range of costs. You'll see that when we go to the next slide as well. But in shelter, which is available to us on an emergency basis, you can see that some of the shelters we're paying less than $100 a day. You can imagine what we're going to get in supporting children at $100 a day. And Commissioner Mata Castillo, I think one of your questions, or maybe, I'm sorry, maybe it was Commissioner McGuire about multiple placements. When I talk about a specific case, you'll see that we do have children who run, and or they won't be able to stay in a particular facility because they've done some property damage or they've injured staff and then they need to go somewhere else. So we are really challenged to keep children out of detention and out of incarceration and in the community, but that is our goal. That is our goal, to do that safely for the child, safely for their family, and safely for the community. You can see that when we have to send children out of state, it's very expensive as well. Listed here is Devereaux, that's about $450 a day. That's a per diem rate. Bar none is, I think, $475. I'm sorry that wasn't included on the slide here. Girard is about $350,000, and Northwood Psychiatric is about $350. So you can see we're paying anywhere from $350 to $500 a day to send children out of state, which means there is a financial cost, but there is a human cost. Children are very separated from their families, their community, their loved ones, and we're paying a lot of money, and our staff are traveling back and forth. And what we find is when the child returns home, that it's an almost impossible adjustment. So the investment that we're making in sending children to out-of-home places, it's a very expensive one, and we're not the child and the family are not achieving the goals that we've talked about to keep children out of displacement. If we go to the next slide. These are some of the programs that we've tried to build up in the county and to provide support for. So Jelani, Jordan House, the Port Group Home is in Brainerd. I don't know that we're using it as much. Nemea House is specifically for girls. It's in Minneapolis. These are expensive placements as well, but I'll talk about this when we get to challenges. We've used what we call an overstaffing model to create security. So the important distinction between social services and some corrections placements, not all, but what we call detention and incarceration, is our ability to lock a door. So in social services, our licensing structures, you cannot put children in locked facilities. So the way we create security is by double staffing. So we have one-on-one staffing. So young people don't run, or we do our best. We have alarms on windows. We have delayed locks on doors, but we cannot lock and keep in children. The only place where we can do that on the social services side is in hospitals or the psychiatric residential treatment facilities, which are, we don't have many of those in Ramsey County. So what we're doing with these models is to try to create an environment that is secure as possible without locking the doors. Again, overstaffing, design of the home, design of the facility, and again, one of our objectives here is to keep children closer to home. If we want to switch to the next slide, then you can also see psychiatric residential treatment facilities that exist in other states. We do have some in Minnesota. The Department of Human Services has just started the allotment of psychiatric residential treatment facilities. These are places where young people who need psychiatric treatment can stay for up to 120 days. I think this is on the next slide. No, go back. I'm sorry, Jamie. Go back. We've had some trouble, and maybe we'll talk about this under challenges as well. We've had some trouble getting the psychiatric residential treatment facilities to take our children, very frankly. There's one, Cambria Hills is new, it's up in Bethel. There's one in Duluth. Trying to think, there's one in Austin. I mean, this is, again, when we get to challenges, I think one of the things is what do we want to do to serve young people in Ramsey County who cross over between our systems and really need to be served. But we struggle with exactly the right placement. What I want to do next on the next slide, Jamie, is just, we don't have a lot of time. So I'm just going to talk about one child, and in doing so, bear with me, but you can just see what we're trying to manage. So I'm just going to use the example of a 14-year-old came to us from another state. So we took this child as a courtesy on probation. They came to Minnesota. The child was removed then from their home after a case was opened by Child Protection in early 2019. The child went to the group home, they damaged property, they stole a car, and they were arrested. So Child Protection picked up the child from, actually they drove out of state. So we picked up the child from out of state, brought him back home, went to emergency shelter. They assaulted a police officer while they were running. They went to our local JDC again. This is a long story, so I'm not going to go all through it, but you can see this young person was doing a remarkable amount of property damage, stealing cars, stealing laptops, equipments, assaulting staff at facilities. And we were doing everything we possibly can between our two systems to try to keep this young person in place, but we just struggled with our ability to do that. And again, we are committed to working together, and we are committed in social services to finding the right place for a young person. That story went on for probably, 3 more assaults, 2 more car chases, a car crash. Our biggest concern, and we hear this from the county attorney's office as well, is that young people may be committing property crimes, but the rest of the community is not tolerant of that. If you're in the community where a young person is committing multiple crimes, property crimes, we have to do everything we can to not only create an environment that's safe for that child, but also safe for that community. Let's move then to the next slide. So this is what I was saying before, and I'm sorry I got ahead of myself. But we're doing everything we can to try to use Minnesota-based facilities. But what we're finding when we try to place children in psychiatric residential treatment facilities is that the facility will say, well, I'm sorry, because they have developmental or cognitive disabilities, or their autism is present, we will not be able to serve this child. Or if there's any kind of physically aggressive behavior, in that case that I just started to outline for you, you can see that clearly there's physically aggressive behavior. And finally, any sexualized behavior or perpetration would limit our ability to place children. So we really do need to find another solution. Both John and I are going to cover the next couple of slides here, and then we wrap up, hopefully have time for questions. But you already heard some of the adjudication considerations that Judge Ireland has described. And John, or Your Honor, if you have more that you want to add there, please do so. But it is one of the reasons cases are transferred between our departments. Okay,
well, thank you, Ann. Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add, but just I appreciate the judge updating us on the adjudication considerations. And again, our concern, as it is for all of us, is the long-term consequences, that if there's a way to avoid someone having a long-term record that could possibly result in additional points if they commit a crime on the adult system, that could lead to longer stays and incarceration, prison, those kind of things too. So we're just always attuned to that. And thank you again to the judge for explaining the details there.
Thank you. Another reason why cases are transferred between departments, there are times when parents or guardians refuse to pick up a child, whether it's from detention or from a hospitalization. If a child is under 18 and a parent refuses to pick them up, we by statute are required to take them into the child protection system. There's also, we've seen an increase in court orders to place children into social services where the jurisdiction has been changed from corrections to social services. Again, I want to say loud and clear, we think this is a good thing. But specifically in a number of orders, we've seen that change from corrections to social services because we believe this child could be better served in the social services system. And then finally, there are the Rule 20 cases. We held a workshop last year, it feels like a long time ago now, but we talked about children that are caught between the criminal justice system and the civil commitment system, and that there's this gap for young people who may or may not be competent to stand trial, and that gap that we talked about. We talked a little bit about young people in that system, but mostly we talked about adults on that day, but the same issues are in place for young people. We don't have many places. The one place we have in Minnesota is the facility that the Department of Human Services runs in Wilmer, Minnesota. It's the CABS, it's the Child and Adolescent Behavioral Health Services program, but they rarely take our children when they're, again, caught between civil commitment and the criminal commitment system. If we want to switch to the next page, we've already talked about a number of these challenges, but this is a way to sum them all up. Secure programming, the difference between a secure program and a locked program gives us challenges. We just don't have enough substance abuse programs for young people in Ramsey County. I know that part of the reason community corrections, they can speak for themselves, but at least they've talked about the program in Moorhead does have some adjunct programs in addition to the detention that's taking place. But we need more chemical dependency services. We always need more mental health support. And we also really need very culturally specific, more therapeutic programs at our local level. We're really trying to build out more programs and services for girls, especially girls who are sexually exploited. I'll let John, if you want to pick up from here and talking a little bit about extended jurisdiction.
Yeah, thank you, Ann. I'll be brief. Obviously, extended juvenile jurisdiction, or extended jurisdiction juvenile, I should say, a statutory situation where we have youth that basically are at the edge of the adult system as well. And so we certainly need additional supports and services for those youth in particular. Many of those youth are the ones that we see in the Red Wing numbers, that they're kind of at the end of the road in the juvenile system in a state correctional facility. Also, corrections and we're all working together on the transforming systems together. So I think getting community input, co-designing more programs with community is really, I think, where we need to move in the future. And that is a lot of the work that we're seeing in TST, both of our departments, along with other, with the courts and county attorney's office as well. There has been some discussion of metro area collaboration, and I think this will be a coffee meeting that Ann and I will have when we can actually see each other again and talk more about, what we can do with, with the other departments that we work with, the other directors that work in corrections or social services, and are there ways to maybe collaborate on services, since there are lots of concerns and issues that I know probably are floating around in all of the counties, particularly in the metro area. And then more expansion of upfront services, the prevention services like ACE, the All Children Excel programming, that we need to have more preventative means to hopefully avoid getting our youth into the deep end of the system, where we end up with these struggles that Ann very clearly explained, where youth may need to be in a detention facility or in a secure setting because of all the behavior issues that we've experienced, or mental health or CD concerns. So those are all, we want to be at the table. We want to talk about these things. And I may just ask too, if Judge Ireland, with the permission of Commissioner Frutham, if you have any thoughts too on places we're missing things, or things that you see from the bench, I would certainly appreciate any thoughts you can share there. And I'll turn over the floor. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with the chemical health, that an expansion of juvenile chemical health. I think, one of the challenges that we're facing is that, given the age and the brain development, long-term consequences versus short-term, that's just not, it's not realistic. That just as a function of your brain, when you're 14 or 15 years old, it's very difficult to expect a 14 or 15-year-old to say, no, I'm not going to do this because it may affect me 2 or 3 years down the line, or frankly, even 6 months down the line. And so I think that's a challenge. I think there is an opportunity, and I totally agree with the early intervention. I think, when we take a step back, we're talking about 55 kids who are in placement, 55. We're talking, and this is not an insurmountable number of complex kids that I think that we can help. And I was talking to Mr. Clavens about this, just last week or a week ago, about looking at, more asset-based evaluations for youth and trying to identify. So much of what we do is trying to identify the deficits and address the deficits, and looking at more asset-based evaluations where you're giving an opportunity, particularly I think from a trauma-informed practice, or kids that have high ACE scores, all their life they've not had any control or any power. And so by shifting some of the dynamics, they're going to be more open if they're the ones that are picking their adventure, so to speak. They're the ones that are saying, this is what I want, this is what I need, and we're serving them. And I think those are opportunities. And sometimes you see that, sometimes you don't. Unfortunately, I think so much of the court system it's premised on addressing bad behavior, right? And so it's focused on the child's deficits and filling those needs. But I think going forward, if we're trying to be trauma informed and we're trying to address ACE factors, I think that's an area that I think is a real opportunity, and where Ramsey County could lead the way.
Thank you so much, Judge Ireland. That's wonderfully well stated. I'll start with, we do have questions here. I'll start with Commissioner Mattis Castillo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As I'm listening to Ann in particular, as you're presenting about how this all weaves into all of our work that we're doing, I'm thinking about, as you share the story of a child or have the opportunity where sometimes families don't go pick them up when they're released. And as shocking as that sounds, I can completely relate to a parent who has tried everything and is so overwhelmed that they just can't do it, right? Or they're thinking about other siblings or other family members that they just can't bring them back into the home. And so, if you're thinking about then how do we treat that, it was like so early in life that they got missed, right? And so as we're thinking about resourcing families and kids, if we can think of ways to get them into, behavioral and developmental waivers where they can get the supports, right? So that if they're needing OT or PT at a younger age, or even the parent just needs respite, right? Because it is very hard when you have a child with behaviors to just keep going and without losing your own mind, right? Or giving up. And so I'm thinking about, even earlier today, as we were sharing about 3 and 4K in St. Paul in the future, like what that does to our whole system, as the earlier we can invest and get services, ahead of time, so that we never get to the justice system. Even though Judge Ireland is awesome and a great partner, we'd rather him never have to see one of our kids. And so to think about, like, how do we keep going earlier? And then if we do have families that are engaged in the system, are we resourcing them immediately, at whatever time they enter the system, but are we wrapping around and resourcing the whole family? Is it that they need a personal care attendant? If we're talking about staffing up group homes and that safety, well, that could be done in the home too, in the same way. And so just thinking about how we're doing that and when we're doing it, and is it consistent across the board, and not just because someone knows to ask for those things, but that we're offering, because when they're overwhelmed, they don't even know what questions to ask, right? So more of a commentary than a question, but I just have so many, I can just see how we could be in that, like as a parent, I could be in that place where maybe I don't pick up my own child, and why I could get there, right? And so to think about what do we do ahead of time.
Thank you, Commissioner Mattis Castillo. And I think that I would actually tie that further back to the discussion we had about our legislative platform and the need to address mental health. And just knowing in my experience, the number of parents who didn't want their child to be assessed, they didn't want that diagnosis or stigmatization. And then we look at the number of sites that are turning away kids that have those diagnoses because it's too complex. But if we can't articulate the problem, that we can't provide appropriate treatment. So it's this double-edged sword that you've identified there. Commissioner McGuire was next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just thank you, Commissioner Matos Castillo. You articulated so many comments so well. And just thanks everyone on this call. It's amazing the great work that you're doing. And this board is, and this county is so amazing, because what we need to do is really strategize, how can we do this? And I think we're aligned in our desire to really help these families, these families earlier on. And so it starts with the prenatal to 3 work that we're doing, and then the 3K work. And you know, when you see those numbers of $550 a day for these kids, if we were to invest that earlier on, and I mean, I know we all know this, and it's just how do we get there? And I know in the legislature, when we're looking for dollars, we want to say, here's, by funding this early intervention program, we save, you know, all this money, you know, not the fiscal note, but the fiscal savings note. And so in our county, I sort of want us to start thinking about doing that, you know, like, okay, if we put money into prenatal to 3 right now, or into this family stability, if we put it into 3K, this is our savings note instead of the fiscal note. So I'm just putting out ideas of how, I mean, we're, as a county, I know we want to do we want to do the right thing. And we have, I know our budget is always, you know, trying to do the right thing, but obviously I think we all want to be focusing our resources earlier on, you know, while we're still dealing with everything we have to currently. But boy, when you see those numbers, it's just amazing. And I'm just so grateful to all of you for this work. And we obviously want to be great partners with you and help with this focusing. And Director Barry, I just have to ask you, so that young 14-year-old that, you know, had so many issues, did he end up having to go into the correction system then? I mean, is that where he ended up needing to be because we just couldn't deal with them? I mean, those scenarios are really tough. So I'm just curious.
Madam Chair and Commissioner McGuire, thank you. So Kim might know the ending of that story. That young person was in and out of emergency shelters and group homes, and emergency shelters and group home. That young person is not in detention. That person is now in an overstaffed, what we would call a double-staffed arrangement. There's lots of reasons young people run. Right. And so it is, and again, I wanted to say earlier, as a person who's had a child in the court system here in Hennepin County, I fully understand a parent being at their wit's end. And so figuring out how we support not only the family, but that young person. And sometimes, I mean, we've gone so far as finding a hotel room where we have 2 staff and 1 child, just long enough so the child doesn't run. You know, just long enough so they build a relationship with the caseworker and the place that they're at, so they don't run back to family, you know, and Commissioner Matos, to your point, and then putting those supports in people's homes. Yeah. Part of that will require us deconstructing the waivers, because right now, DHS won't allow us to use waivers for families that are, you know, have interactions with the correction system. So we can change that. We can fix that, right? But anyways, to answer a lot of questions at once, the answer is, in that case, no, this child is not in detention.
Wow.
But then we hit the other, what happens when a child turns 18? Yeah. Which is, you know, we run out of time with some young people as well. So anyway.
Thank
enough.
you.
Sure.
Thank you all. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And Commissioner McGuire, I'm going to note we've got 4 more questions, so I want to get to everyone, but also that we are at 12:04. So if you can keep your comments and questions brief, that'd be wonderful. Commissioner Carter.
Thanks. I will keep it brief. Just noting the last statement that Director Berry made, we can change that. And that's been what we've been doing here in Ramsey County. I appreciate that everyone is taking risk together, understanding that public safety is of multiple components. And we've been looking at it comprehensively to try to figure out what we can do to change that trajectory from the very earliest point and to continue to watch to see that young people are developing carefully and positively in our systems. I just, everybody has said thank you to all of the facets of this work, to the judges who are represented here today by Judge Ireland, to our county attorney who's doing some phenomenal work looking at reimagining justice, public health, where we are focused on prevention, looking at the work we're doing across the board. It's important that we know it's about our community taking risk together with us. And so I'll just refashion the question that I asked at the beginning, which was specifically about how are we tracking reoffending? How are we making certain that we're telling the story, that the outcomes additionally that have to do with positive ways of interacting in the community are being brought to the fore. And I would just say that we have to tell that story, because if not, it will be told for us, of how these young people are able to be more successful, of the impact that we're seeing on that comprehensive vision of public safety, even of how offending in the community tracks with the work that we're doing or does not. It might be counter-cyclical, as one would imagine, as we're working on alternatives and seeing positive results, although those positive results get buried, especially during times like this past year. And we do have to tell the story. So thank you so much for the work. I won't ask the question to be responded to right now, but simply just know that we'll want to come back around to see how we're telling this story. The work is phenomenal. The impact is great. And we want to be able to repeat that out in our communities. Thank you to everyone. And I didn't mention all of the various areas where the work is happening, but it's comprehensive. It's about using all of our resources to ensure our best outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Carter. Commissioner McDonough.
Thanks, Chair Fretham. I'm still having major connection problems, so if you can't hear me, just indicate and I'll quit talking and you can move on. But, I really appreciate, I think, looking back to where we're at and hearing where we're at today, lots of good news, excitement, knowing where we need to go, a lot of work to be done yet. A lot of that list of challenges is huge, and we've got a lot of gaps in the system, but I'm confident we got great people working at it. The one thing I'd like to put out there as a challenge maybe is, I think we've all been to community meetings, right, where community has raised concerns. I go back to Ann's comment about community tolerance. And, the response from law enforcement is, well, we bring them down there, they're back out on the corner quicker than we can get back out there, right? They throw it back into that. Or I'll even recall, our own sheriff responding to a Vadnais Heights City Council meeting on, carjackings, and he actually took it right back to this. And so the work that we need to do, especially with law enforcement and, this attitude towards policing, but then this concept of just lock them up and get them out of community. And I'll go back and I'll end real quickly. And, and I know we're running out of time, but it might be a conversation for another time. But, truly, I believe tolerance is related to the amount of information and understanding you have, right? And so all this work we're doing here, there is going to be a point where unless we get other leaders,
Oh, Commissioner McDonough, we lost you.
Other leaders to help tell our story and continue to push us forward, I think is where he's going, because he talked to me about this not that long ago. So hopefully I hit that part, and point noted, even if you didn't quite get to finish it, Commissioner.
Thank you. I'll move along to Commissioner Reinhardt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I've been pretty quiet through this because I wanted to really hear all of the information. And the thing that I am most struck by is really the fact that by the time a child gets into the juvenile justice system, it's really too late. I mean, trying to change a teenager's way of thinking and the trajectory of their life at that point is much more difficult, which is why, you know, the All Children Excel, but there are other programs too that are for children that are under 10 years of age who can't be arrested, but really need the help because of mental health issues, the issues at home, but also ethnicity. I mean, the racial disparities are just astounding and appalling. And so that gets back to systems change. Many of you know that, I mean, my dissertation is on proper taxes that are not that don't have to be paid if you can prevent crime in the first place, taxpayer costs avoided through preventing crime. And that was for children under 10 years of age, and how you pull the community together, not just one program here or there, but you pull the community together and you stay with, in the case of ACE, you stay with the child until they're in their teens, but you treat the entire family. You know, if mom needs mental health care, then that's what you provide. If brothers and sisters or dads or whatever, if there's addiction issues, which is often part of this problem, all of those things, looking at things in a more holistic manner. And so I think the prevention part of it, I mean, one of the reasons that I did my dissertation on that subject was because it wasn't something that was talked about. It was, you know, either you don't want to spend any money or you want to do what's right. Well, then figure out where those two intersect. It not only saves lives, but it saves money at $500 a day. It doesn't take much to figure out how much can be saved if you never have that child in that system. And so I feel so strongly about the fact that we need to go further upstream, or I don't even know which part of the stream it's in, but it has to be at a younger age, because these kids are trying to deal with life the best way they can, and it's not in a good way for them or society or for the trajectory of their life. So, the one thing that I mentioned at the county board meeting, that I was part of a town hall, and Representative Fisher, and he was talking about mental health issues, and he talked about the fact that he had had a call from a constituent, parents, who had an 11-year-old who was in a mental health crisis that they had to take into the emergency room. They could find no place for this kid. It happened on a Thursday and on Friday, on Saturday, and finally they had to go. The child spent the entire weekend basically without a place to go, and so the parents had to go and pick him up. He didn't receive any services. I mean, it was just holding so that the parents could try to figure out how to deal with the rest of their family as well. So there are, you know, whatever the issues are, I think we all know it's logical that if you address them early, you have a better chance of success. So I appreciate everything that has been provided here today. Well worth the time, and I know we've gone over time, but we just have to really keep pushing at the fact that the kids need support, they need help, and if it gets to a certain point where they need to be, you know, there's still obviously a role for corrections in all of this, but for the kids, it's really about what do you do to get them on the right path, and that means you get them on that path early on. So I hope we can really zero in more on that. And I know Judge Ireland, you've talked about it, and so have the other people that are on the call here, how important that is. So I'm off my soapbox now. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Reinhardt. Commissioner Ortega.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be brief. I totally agree. We all agree that prevention is the name of the game and we have to do more there. And the staff has done a great job. You know, we've got the ship moving in the right direction. I guess two things resonated with me recently in the discussion. First, the judge said, we're talking about 55 kids. 55 kids. It just seems like, boy, we should be able to do something. I mean, these numbers are not, you know, overwhelming at this point. I mean, I know we got other issues. The other thing is we don't have enough substance abuse services in Ramsey County. So I guess the question that's running around in my head is, and we've done a lot, the staff's done a great job, we've restructured, we tried to redirect services, redesign, et cetera, et cetera. My question is, what is the investment? Can we project what is the fiscal investment to tip the scale? Because it seems like we've done so much and we're there. We know we got the formula. We know where we're heading. We know we got to keep building the partnership. We got to do more prevention. But in the meantime, we got a whole generation today that we got to help. And it seems like we need to figure out what is the investment that sort of tips the scale. I'll leave it at that.
Madam Chair, if I could just to speak to that, I mean, that is, my dissertation lays out what are the costs that go into and what are the proven juvenile crime prevention programs and does it save money? Because ultimately it seems to come down to money quite often. And even though my dissertation is from the early 2000s, and I published in 2007, the fact of the matter is the basic services that we provide, including out-of-home placement because of social services, because a parent or family member are incarcerated, we can calculate that, but we have to have the programming that deals with it as well. So that information is available. I know because I put it together and it was for Minnesota and it was for Ramsey County.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Reinhardt and Commissioner Ortega. Thanks again to everyone for the information shared today, just to kind of tie together what we've heard in terms of follow-up and themes. I don't want to lose Commissioner Mattis Castillo's note that we want to make sure that this doesn't push judges to shift youth into the adult system or prosecutors to avoid these interventions. And so tracking those numbers is important. Commissioner Carter has raised, and Commissioner Ortega as well, this question of reoffending. And I think that really also ties to Commissioner McDonough's point about community perception, education, and engagement, and how do we bring other leaders along this path. And then finally, a recurring theme that we've heard repeatedly is the importance of early intervention. And as we continue to support the youth who need these additional supports, that the more we can work now to invest in children and families sooner, the fewer children and youth will have in this situation in the long run. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kathy Hadeen to issue any final remarks before we adjourn.
Yes, I just, a big thank you to everyone here and the work that was done to put this together. It's such an important topic and issue that we all need to focus on. We know that unless we disrupt this system, and to be blunt, our traditionally racist system, as we look at the disparities that we still see today, the trajectory of an infant, of a child, of a young person based on previous generations' experience with this system, is going to keep going in this direction. These are the leaders that you see here, along with all the staff that they're working with within their areas, who are working to disrupt this system, along with our judges, along with our courts, to really make these impactful changes for the whole family, as was noted by Commissioner McGuire, that this work is happening across our system, and this is a piece of it, and for also the youth that are involved. I'm just really proud of everyone here for the work that's been going on. For anyone who is close to somebody who has been through a system like this, who has run from a system, or just never felt safe and always acting out, this is so important that we continue to disrupt this and stop this from happening so that all of our young people can thrive. So I appreciate everyone. Thank you all so much. Nice to see everyone and be here today. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, we are adjourned.
See you all at 1:30. Okay. Thank you. Great job.